Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 1871 podcast. And before we introduce our special guest for this episode, we have some exciting news for you. So we're about to announce the winners of our competition to win tickets to the Reading FC Legends Q&A events at the Purple Turtle in Reading next month. So the three events are as follows. On Sunday, November the 10th, it's the Q&A with Nicky Shorey. Sunday, November the 17th, Adam Lafondra. And Sunday, November the 24th, Jem Karachan. All three events are at the Purple Turtle and they all start at 1 p.m. And thank you to everyone who entered to win a pair of tickets. And even if you haven't won, you can still buy tickets. But without further ado, here are our three winners who have all won a pair of tickets to one of the three events. So the winners were randomly drawn and they are as follows. And Johnny Hunt, can I have a drum roll, please? Oh, I can't hear the drum roll, but I think it doesn't work as well if you're miming it. But anyway,
There you go.
So our first winner of a pair of tickets to next month's Reading FC Legends events at the Purple Turtle is, dramatic pause, Alex Blissett. So congratulations to Alex. And our second winner of a pair of tickets is, dramatic pause, Steve Rex. And our third winner is, another dramatic pause, Bradley Sargent. So congratulations to our three winners. And don't worry, if you haven't won tickets, they're still available to buy at £12.50 each by sending a WhatsApp message to the following number, which is 07842 627 548. That's 07842 627 548. So many congratulations to our three winners, and we're really looking forward to those three events with Nicky Shorey, Adam Lafondra and Jem Karachan. That's at the Purple Turtle next month. And now on with the rest of the episode. And talking of Reading FC legends, our focus for this episode of the 1871 podcast is on the one and only Michael Gilkes. So we will be looking at what made Michael Gilkes such an iconic player for Reading. But as I imagine most, if not all of you know, he's still at Reading. He's a coach, works with the under-21s. So we're also joined by a special guest to give us some insight into what Michael Gilkes is like as a coach. So I'd like to welcome former West Ham player and coach educator, Geoff Pike. So hello to you, Geoff, and welcome to the 1871 podcast.
Hi, Mark. Great to meet you. Great to see you again. Looking forward to it.
And thanks ever so much for joining us, Geoff. So just an introduction to Geoff. Geoff played for West Ham for many years. He won the FA Cup with West Ham in 1980. And until recent years, that was the last time that West Ham won a trophy, which I'm sure, Geoff, you've heard a few times. You were manager of Notts County as well. And you worked as a national coach developer at the FA. So that's why we wanted to bring you on. You've got actually a lot of connections with ex-players, ex-managers at Reading, but you were actually Michael Gilkes' coach mentor. So just to recap on Michael Gilkes first as a player. So Michael Gilkes joined Reading in 1984, played as a winger, made 486 appearances, scored 52 goals. And my all-time favourite Reading player, I'm sure that's the same for many of you who have been supporting Reading for that long. But let's talk about Michael Gilkes, the player now. So Reading, he went on loan to Chelsea, Southampton, played for Wolves, played for Millwall, played for his country, Barbados. But he's still at Reading. He's a Reading legend. And he's coaching with the under-21s, and he was interim manager for a spell as well at Reading. So firstly, just a quick chat with Johnny. Johnny, what do you remember about Michael Gilkes? What made him so special as a player?
I think there's nothing more iconic than Gilkes ringing up the win in the title, at the Elm Park, was there? And he was phenomenal speed. yeah, he just was one of those players that you love watching. You know, it can be a little bit unpredictable at the times, but the pace and the running at players, old-fashioned football, if you like to call it. You know, would actually just run and go. Take players on. It was exciting to watch, and created so many goals as well as the goals he scored. And a lovely guy as well. That part of it, he's a real decent, sound guy who, you ain't going to see many players play that many games for a club anymore. And that's a different era, unfortunately. But to then be involved as a player, now to be involved as a coach, his legend lives on. He's just a sound guy.
That's it. Well, he's still at Reading now. As you say, the legend lives on, and I think that's key to it as well. He's a really likable guy, but a brilliant player. That song, "Run, Run, 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 Gilkes," in front of the South Bank. I just remember seeing him play under the floodlights at Elm Park midweek games, and he scored a brilliant goal. I think it was against Derby in the fog. So many happy memories of watching Michael Gilkes play. But we'll come to Geoff now, and Geoff actually, before we started recording this, we asked him if he had any connections with anyone else. He's played for Reading or managed Reading, and the list went on and on and on. So, Geoff, before we start talking about Michael Gilkes,
Mark, I've got one more to add to that as well.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, so
Nicky Shorey.
Yeah,
Nicky was at Leighton Orient when I was at Leighton Orient as a youth coach, and Nicky was in the academy at Leighton Orient because his dad was my assistant.
Yeah. So
so I've known Nicky since he was like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah, so Nicky Shorey, that first event at the Purple Turtle, November the 10th, and the list goes on, doesn't it? You've like Adam Pardew, Steve Coppell, Amon Dolan. You said,
yeah. Well, as I said when we spoke earlier with Amon, for example, Amon played at West Ham as a young player and was at the academy at West Ham around the same time that I was. And I played with him. I think in the first team, he didn't make many first team appearances for West Ham, but whatever he did, he tried 100% every time. And I was glad to see that he got on really well, not only as a player, but after his playing career finished, he did exceptionally well. And then it was a great sad loss when he sadly passed away.
Yeah, and absolutely echo what you said there. He's you'd class him as a legend, wouldn't you, Johnny?
Definitely. The academy wouldn't be what it is without him. And again, a lovely guy as well, aside from being what he was on and off the pitch and coaching wise, an absolute legend. That we still sadly miss every day.
And coming back to you, Geoff, Alan Pardew, Steve Coppell, there's plenty of others as well. Just talk us through your,
Well, my main connection with Alan Pardew was when he was manager at West Ham. I was doing a weekly radio show in the local radio on a Friday evening, a West Ham hour called Hammer Time. And I was working at the PFA at the time, and I went over to Chadwell Heath training ground once a week just to get some insight into what's going on for the radio show. And Alan was really good about it. We spoke on regular times, and he was very open and honest about the way things were going. And funnily enough, I saw him about a month ago at West Ham. He was over there doing some commentary work with someone. Hadn't seen him for a long while, and it was just like walking back into the room and saying, hello mate, how are you, sort of thing, whilst I didn't play with or against him in that respect, or in and around the Reading connection part of it, we still had a connection from the West Ham era.
Yeah, and Steve Coppell as well. You mentioned him on your list.
Yeah, Steve was obviously, he was a legend in the game, and I'm convinced 100% that I played against him at some point. But that was probably the only real connection that we had. But followed his career over many years, and he's done given a lot back into the game. And that's one of the things that I find quite disturbing, Mark, if I'm honest. You know, there's lots of players from our era, the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, maybe touching the 90s, that are prepared to give something back into the game. But beyond that, I find that really challenging when you look at people. As you spoke about in the introduction, I'm what they call a coach developer or coach educator. So I deliver the coaching qualifications, or used to, on a regular basis. And I went over to the club will remain nameless. Went over there and was working with one of the coaches at the club to get their UEFA Pro license. And I spoke with I spoke with 5 or 6 of the senior players, including England international players, and asked them if they wanted any assistance around their coaching qualifications. And they basically said they weren't interested. You know, which disturbs me. And, you know, I mean, we've just got a new manager for the England team, and he's a foreign manager. And people are saying, why haven't we got any more English? Why haven't we got any English managers to take his place? Well, it might be because the people are not interested in doing it, and that's whether it's a financial thing or not. I don't know.
Yeah, Geoff, it's fair to say that you've given back to the game, and a lot of the, you know, the ex-players and others that have come through and become managers and coaches, you've worked with a lot of them. So before we start talking about Michael Gilkes, who were some of the kind of the names that people would know who have gone on to become managers and coaches that you work with as an FA coach developer?
Yeah. I worked one of the guys, Paul Clement, who had a very successful career as a manager. He seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth at this moment in time. But I worked with Paul when he was at Fulham, as in the academy, working at Fulham, and saw him progress and develop. And another great Reading player, Brian McDermott, who's a friend of mine. Unfortunately, we haven't spoken for quite some time, but worked with Brian over many years. You know, helping him. You know, when he was at Reading, especially as well. You know, and then you got people like Nigel Adkins, who, you know, has been in and around the game a long time. And then we go back to people like Brendan Rodgers, who I first came across when he was working at Chelsea. In the academy at Chelsea. So, and then the last one on my list that I drew up earlier today, Mark, is a friend of mine called Jimmy Quinn, who actually played at West Ham and is one of the West Ham matchday ambassadors. So I see him on quite a regular basis.
Yeah, Jimmy Quinn, what a player! If you're talking about Reading legends, part of the same team that Michael Gilkes was in, you know, we all love a goal scorer, and he was certainly that season that Reading got promoted, won the league, and then nearly went up to the Premier League the following season. He got 40 goals that season, just phenomenal for Reading, and genuine Reading legend. So let's come on to talking about Michael Gilkes now. When did you first meet Michael Gilkes, Geoff?
Well, I knew Michael for quite a period of time, but I got involved with him more when he started to do his UEFA Pro license. So I sort of mentored him through that program, and it was we met on a fairly regular basis, and we had lots of interaction when he was up at St George's Park doing on the course blocks of work. But I'd come across Michael before that, but it was very fleetingly. It was sort of very intermittent and, you know, sort of passing in the night type thing. You know, we sort of just acknowledged each other and said hello. But you know, when we got involved with the pro license, I got to know Michael really well, and, you know, we got on exceptionally well, and it was great working with him. He was you know, he was quite a very humble person. You know, he didn't want to elaborate too much on his own playing career, even though it was a very good playing career. He was quite happy to just let that, you know, go into the background and you move on, which he has done, and he's done that very well. And, you know, considering that, you know, management in clubs changes on a fairly regular basis nowadays, to be at Reading for the period of time that he's been at has been remarkable.
And Johnny, coming to you now, I mean, some of those names that Geoff mentioned, Brian McDermott and you know, a Jimmy Quinn. I mean, that's a proper list of Reading legends right there, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
what Amon Dolan as well. What those players contributed to Reading, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's almost like a list of our management going through the years, isn't it? Pretty much of what
Yeah.
they've become. But I mean, I don't know some of them as well, but I think the common element amongst a lot of those guys is down to earth and just great human beings. Aside from their footballing skills or management skills, they're decent people, and I think decent people get a long way in any form of life, and that's what fits Reading, because they're humble and they give back to the club, and they help, and there's no ego, or there's no all about me with them, and that's something unique, I think, especially now in football.
Well, it's interesting with Michael Gilkes because we've invited him to be a guest. He's kind of one of the very short list now, because Phil Parkinson was on that list and he was a guest recently. So that's a tick from that one. Michael Gilkes, I asked him, I think this sums him up and I respect this. And he said, look, with everything that's going on at the club, I just want to keep my head down. And I understand that. I respect that. So, Michael, if you're listening to this, it's like this is your life a little bit, isn't it? So, if you are listening to this, we'd love to have you on as a guest at some point. But respect the fact that you just want to get on and do your job. And he's kind of in the background. He was sort of thrust into the limelight a little bit when he was interim manager. But Johnny, is there anything you want to ask Geoff about Michael Gilkes as a person, as a coach, etc.?
Yeah, Geoff, it's kind of for Michael, but I've touched on it there. What makes somebody like Michael, a good coach, when you've probably worked with or played with a lot of players that may be better players but don't have that coaching prowess or knowledge? Can you
it's about understanding the person you're working with, Johnny.
Okay.
And understanding that. And Michael would take the time to understand that and understand the people that he's working with,
Yeah.
and understand their way of picking things up and learning. I mean, we've often spoke to a lot of coaches about how they develop their young players, and Michael, being in and around the youth system for quite some time, has had a massive influence on that. And what we tended to find was that people were unaware of how people develop and young players develop. And we just a simple example would be, for example, when you're going to deliver a session, the coach would stand there and explain to the players what they were going to be doing. And there'd be some players that were potentially not listening to what was going on, allegedly, but because they were distracted or looked like they were distracted.
Yeah.
But how do you know that they're not actually listening? So what tended to happen was Michael would explain what was going on and go through that process, and then let the players go out there and determine what was going on. And some of those players who allegedly weren't listening actually were listening.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of that, he gave ownership to the players to be able to understand those types of things. One of the biggest things that came back to me when I was working with Michael on his pro license was his thoughts around the modern game. So at the time, there was a lot of foreign or overseas coaches coming into this country and working, and a lot of overseas players coming into the country and playing with the clubs. So with your UEFA Pro license, at the end of the whole 18 months, you have to deliver a part of your project. So I worked with him on his project, and his project was about learning around people with foreign languages. So he actually went to a night school to learn Spanish. And then when he delivered his final project in front of a group of people, he got two people to come in, and he sat down as if he was being interviewed by the press. And he had one guy who was speaking to him in English, asking him a question. And he had another guy speaking to him in Spanish, asking him a question. And he was answering the Spanish guy in Spanish and answering the English guy in English. there isn't that many coaches that would go into that depth of understanding. They would go, well, they should speak English because we all speak English. No, that's not necessarily the case. You know, so it impressed me massively that he went out and took his time to do that over a period of time. And he continued to do it. Whether he actually completed the course, I can't answer that question. But the knowledge that he gained because of that would have helped him massively.
And Geoff, we touched on it earlier. You talked about dealing with people, and it's young people. Some of them might have, you know, moved from a different country or another part of the UK, away from home, away from their sort of circle of friends, their family. But also, you touched on it there with Michael about dealing with people as individuals. What was his sort of key strengths and skills in terms of how he dealt with them as individual people?
Well, he was very understanding of them. So it wasn't, I'm the coach, I'm going to be doing this, and this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to happen. He would have a conversation. It wasn't dictatorial in any way, shape, or form. It was more collaborative. So he would have an understanding. So he would get some information back to be able to do the right thing at the right time for that particular individual.
And Johnny, coming to you now, Geoff mentioned earlier that with some ex-players, they're not really that interested, but with Reading, you know, despite everything that's going on at the club, the academy is still standing strong, and we've had a 16-year-old make his debut for the first team, Andre Garcia. We've got a young team, and our hand has been forced. A lot of those players have come through sooner than they would have done because of transfer embargoes, etc. But if you look at who we've got in the academy setup, you've got Noel Hunt, obviously, had a spell as Reading's manager. You've got Michael Gilkes, Michaeli Ledgerwood. So we've still got that connection with the club, with the academy, and we're all, you know, high praise for Ruben Sellers coming in and doing what he's done. But you know, how important do you think it's been to Reading's survival, Johnny, that we've got such a good academy, and we've got these ex-Reading players? I mean, Noel Hunt, fantastic player, played in the Premier League. That's really part of what's keeping our identity alive at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, they put into those players what it means to play for Reading. And those young players go, yeah, well, they've done it. It's not somebody coming in from outside telling them, yeah, you know, you need to know what it's like to play for this club. We haven't played for the club. Those three, I'm sure, you know, they must have conversation after conversation, because they're in the same, from different ages. There's the same message, I think, from Michael to Noel Gilkes, and then up to Ruben in the first team. There's a pathway that we used to have and have had for a long time, and they, you know, this is what it's like to play for this club. If you want to play for this club, these are the expectations of us. And those expectations are the same as they go through the different age groups. So there's consistency there, and there's the same approach, not going from one coach who's doing one thing at one level to someone and they're expecting something else, and they're expecting, you know, there's a pathway, and it's the Reading way, as we call it. You know, it's the good old Reading way.
Yeah, and Geoff, coming back to you now, just going back to Michael Gilkes. When you'd been working with him for a while, you get a gut feeling about people, and you know, what did you think in terms of his attributes and how he handled himself and the type of things you were talking about? What did you feel that he would bring as a coach that maybe kind of was unique to him?
Well, firstly, you wanted to be in his company. You know, it wasn't one of those things where I would be working with a number of people, and I've worked with a number of people over many, many years. And some of them you think, oh my goodness, you know, I've got to go over there, you know, or whatever. But I enjoyed being in Michael's company. I enjoyed working with him. And I wrote down something here when Johnny was just talking about the academy down at Reading. You know, we always ask the question of the coaches about whether in the academy at their particular club, would you be developing the players for the club, or would you be developing the players for football? So are you giving them an overall education in a way, in a sense that you know they can get transferred from Reading to another club and still perform at the highest that they can perform? But there was an added bit onto it, and this is where I think Michael comes in, because it's not about developing players for the club or for football, it's about developing players for life. And that for me is what Michael's all about.
Yeah, and developing young people as well. And Geoff, you just tell us a little bit about your story as well. And you was it East Berks College? You've got a story about a player you developed there, and I think this aligns with what you're talking about with Michael Gilkes. So tell us that story.
Well, I left Leyton Orient and was out of work for a period of time. And a friend of mine who worked at East Berkshire College invited me along to an interview to be a support person for the tutors, you know, in the sport department. But while we was there, we set up an academy for players that had been released by football clubs, local clubs, at 16 and never got a contract with them, to try and redevelop or continue to develop them so they could get back into the game at a later date. And we had a couple of guys, and Lloyd Owusu is the one that stands out more than anybody. Lloyd came in they were getting educated there while they were doing the same thing, and being coached and playing at Slough Town as a youth team for Slough Town for a short period of time, and then we moved to clubs because Slough went under, unfortunately. But you know, it was an opportunity for those guys to get another opportunity in a game that they love, because at 16 they hadn't finished developing, but a decision was made on them at 16. You know, so we put that on, and it was like a 2-year program, and we had these guys go back into the professional game. As a consequence of that, there was a number of other people who'd seen the model that we were doing and was trying to emulate that. So it's very much around, you know, looking at them saying you haven't failed. What you've done is you're still developing, and we're going to continue to help you develop. And I think that's where Michael is at this moment in time doing the under-21s, it's very much along those lines. It's very much around, well, there's still some development to be had, you know, because in my day, you know, I played when I was I made my debut in, you know, when I was sort of 18, 19 years old. It doesn't often happen nowadays. I mean, I look at West Ham, for example, and they've got an under-21 squad, and I'm wondering when they're going to start getting opportunity to play in the first team. And it doesn't seem to happen that much nowadays. Whereas at Reading, that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be developing the players for the club, but not only for the club, but for football and for life. So that's where Michael comes in.
Yeah, and we keep talking about Michael Elise, but he's a really good example. He was at Chelsea, left Chelsea, came to Reading, came through the youth ranks, got into the first team, then went on to Crystal Palace, and now he's, you know, flourishing at Bayern Munich. So that's a really good example. And obviously those people that we've mentioned, Michael, were part of that journey. But Geoff, you know, how would you sum up Michael as a person in terms of, you know, how he kind of conducted himself, how he obviously continues to conduct himself, from your personal experience? How would you sum him up?
Well, I think using the word humble earlier on was part of that process. I would say that he is a person that you would probably, the easiest way to describe it, Mark, is you'd like to go down the pub with him and have a drink. You know, he's that type of person. He's not the type of person that you would want to avoid in any way, shape, or form. It was the type of person you want to be in the company of.
Yeah, I agree with that, Geoff, as well. I'm sure you do as well, Johnny. Johnny, is there anything else that you want to ask Geoff?
No, I just actually bumped into Gilkes in a pub in Ireland last year, which is quite bizarre talking about that, and it was pretty much like that. No, I'm just on a general coaching, Geoff. Like, what makes coaches successful? You know, you said about Michael, and looking at the coaches that kind of constantly getting jobs and others that seem to do the rounds. What would you say? What makes a good coach over an average?
Johnny, that's a $6 million question, isn't it? The difference is, I think personally, the difference is the way they work with the players and understand the player.
Yeah.
It's not trying to teach them something or trying to coach them into doing something that they can't do. It's recognizing their strengths, recognizing their weaknesses, continue to work with their strengths and try and develop their weaknesses as best you possibly can. And I think that's an observational type thing, but also a skill to understand that what that person's going through. And because I'll give you probably the easiest way to describe it, Johnny, is an example of Wayne Burnett. I don't know if you've heard of Wayne, but he worked down at Dagenham and Redbridge, and he worked for the FA. And he was a young player at Leyton Orient when I was a youth coach, and I used to do the youth team and the reserves at the same time. And we played in a reserve team fixture, and he played in central midfield. And at half time, I was a young coach. I absolutely berated him because of what he was doing. A few weeks later, he got an opportunity to make his debut in the first team. And I found out years later when I was working with him on his coaching qualifications, that the night before his debut in the first team, he didn't have a night's sleep in his bed because he was sat outside his mum's flat, and his mum was out out doing whatever she did, and he couldn't get in. So he sat by the front door all night, and then got up and played the game the next day. I didn't know anything about that at the time. So his life was horrendous as a young person, and I'm standing there at I think it was Oxford, absolutely berating him because he's not doing that, not knowing those things. Yeah. Whereas I think now what the coaches need to do and understand the person. And if you understand the person and understand everything that's going on within that person's life, you've got more chance of helping them out and them becoming a better player. And
Geoff, bringing it back to the current Reading team and also the successful Reading teams of the past, with, you mentioned Steve Coppell. I think part of the success at that time with Reading, we've mentioned Brian McDermott, we've mentioned Eamon Dolan. It was a whole team of people. Steve Coppell was the manager, but you had Wally Downs as well, got his certain personality. And then Alan Pardew had Martin Allen as his assistant, certain type of personality. But bringing it forward to the current Reading team. So, we've been going through a horrendous time with points deductions, transfer embargoes, and what Ruben Sellers has done is a minor miracle. And actually, on the pitch, you could argue that because of everything that's going on off the pitch, we're overachieving in a way, because it's so horrendous what's going on off the pitch. So I think that's a key factor there, isn't it? What Ruben Sellers is doing, he's got a group of young people, and he's well liked as a manager. He's well respected, and you can tell when you watch them play that obviously they're going to win some games, lose some games, but they're all together as a team, and actually the team remarkably is doing quite well on the pitch despite everything, and that's got to come down to Ruben Sellers and how he's working with those players as individuals rather than football players. Do you know what I mean?
Sure, but what he's also doing, Mark, is protecting the players against what is going on the outside. Or the players don't need to know about that. They'll read stuff about it, but the real in-depth detail stuff that is probably causing him to lose sleep over is probably the bit that they won't ever find out about. But being able to do that is a real skill, to be able to do that and to maintain the consistency that the club's maintaining at this moment in time is, you know, down to not only him but also the people that work with him all around that as well, because it'll affect everybody as well.
Yeah, and Johnny, just finally coming over to you now. Obviously, we've spoken about Michael Gilkes, Noel Hunt, Michael Ledgerwood, the academy. You know, the academy's been fantastic for Reading. But looking at the first team and the manager, Ruben Sellers, what Geoff was talking about there, I mean, he's doing a remarkable job, and it's got to be to do with that sort of thing, hasn't it, really?
Yeah, I think, you know, he's you know, he knows, and he's been dealing with this for so long now that you know, he respects the players respect him, and we know that they're not going to, you know, win every game because they're a young team, they're a small squad. But what he does, he puts them out there and they play with pride, and they play with pride in the shirt, and that's what we want, and the fans will support them, they back them because we know what's going on off the pitch. And you know, and then that's a really nice united spirit. And you know, Ruben could have left probably many opportunities because he's a good coach. He can coach higher, but hopefully he'll stay because he's part of the project. He wants to look after those young folks because at the end of the day, they're all people. Aside from footballers, they're human beings, and they have families and, you know, lives, and you know, they deserve better.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mentioned Steve Coppell's time at the club and the backroom staff, the likes of Brian McDermott and Eamon Dolan and Nick Hammond, what they did. It's kind of a lot of that is the unseen work that goes towards making a team and a club successful, which obviously we had. But I think the same is true now with what's happening with the academy, the work that Noel Hunt's doing, Michael Ledgerwood, and obviously Michael Gilkes as well. So been fantastic to speak to you, Geoff. And just a final word, Michael, if you are listening, we'd love you to be a guest on the podcast. Even if you don't, we still respect you. We still love you. You're still a Reading legend. But if you can come on at some point, that'd be great. So Geoff and Johnny as well, thanks to both of you, and really enjoyed that. And yeah, thanks for your time, Geoff.
Thanks,
No
Geoff.
problem, Mark. Anytime.